but rather it was the harsh circumstances of one's life that cornered people into evil actions. I believe this moral relativism is something our culture and government embeds into our beliefs at a young age because if we cannot recognize evil, we cannot begin to fight against it. I have Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party to thank for showing me what an evil person might look like. When I witnessed so much greed and cruelty from the left, the notion that they were misguided no longer held up. That's from Tom.
Hey, Tom, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing excellent. It's a pleasure to speak with you today.
I appreciate that. Let's hope we can keep it up. So, evil. Now, I mean, I've got a bunch of podcasts on evil, but it has been a while since we've talked about the topic. So to me, if a toddler finds a gun and is playing with it and the gun goes off and shoots a dog, we don't say that the toddler is morally responsible, I would assume. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah, a toddler doesn't even know what a gun is. I mean, doesn't know what it's for, doesn't know what the trigger is. It's just bad luck for the dog, right? However, if there's an adult who is a gun trainer, like trains people in guns, knows what the safety is, knows how to hold it, knows how to point it, knows how to load it, knows aim for the center of mass, like all this stuff, right? If somebody trains other people in the use of firearms and that person shoots someone, they're probably a little bit more likely to be morally responsible, right?
Right. And I don't think it's necessarily the concept of evil itself. I feel pretty black and white.
Hang on. We're going off in some different direction already. Let me just finish this case, all right? Then we'll go off in that other direction. And the difference is, Tom, that the firearms instructor knows firearms and uses firearms and, in fact, instructs other people in firearms. So the difference is between the toddler and the gun instructor is that if you lecture other people on morals, if you tell other people what is virtuous, if you use ethics, then you are susceptible to ethics. Now, you can have had a traumatic childhood, you could have had a bad upbringing, you could have all these kinds of things. None of that gives you the predilection to necessarily use ethics in your interactions with other people, right? So, you know, like Kaczynski, right? The guy from K-File who recently got into, I guess, some hot water by talking about CNN's desire to reveal the personality of the person who created or may have created this Trump wrestling CNN to the ground kind of meme. You know, apparently in the past, he was really appalled at people who doxed, you know? So it's like, okay, so now you're morally responsible. The moment you say to other people, thou shalt not steal, then you are morally responsible for stealing. The moment you say to other people, it's important to treat others with dignity and respect, and the moment you start screaming at someone and calling them names, then you are morally responsible. If you use ethics, you're subject to ethics. Now, that having been said, there is a layer of abstraction that's tough for people to follow, right? So just about everyone would say, don't steal, but it's harder for people to understand that taxation is theft, right? So there's a lot of propaganda around that, which is why when I talk to people initially, you know, if I had talked to someone about ethics and they say, oh yeah, stealing from shops is cool, you know, there's like, okay, well, you're just like a really, really vile specimen and all that. But if they say, oh no, it's important to respect property rights, you shouldn't steal, I don't immediately condemn them for not understanding that taxation is theft, because that is kind of outside the matrix of everyday ethics that most people operate in. So what it means to be an evil person is to have a very strong understanding of ethics, to have a very strong understanding of virtue, to use that to control other people, and then to disobey that yourself. I'll give you a tiny example. It's a big example historically, but it's relatively focused. So when communists want to take over a country, they want to gain control of property in that country. Like the rand in South Africa just took a massive dip because there's rumors that the ANC-controlled government in South Africa is thinking of nationalizing the central bank. Ooh. And then we will witness the appalling spectacle of a country enormously rich in gold having a virtually worthless currency. Just another one of the paradoxes that happen when you go full lefty. But The communists get into power. First thing they do, nationalize, nationalize, nationalize. They take. They control. And then do you know what they say? Property is theft. It's like, well, in communism, it kind of is, because the government defines everything as property, this means of production, and steals the living hell out of it from everyone else. So yeah, I mean, the communists say, well, private property is bad, control over the means of production, it's exploitation. So we want to have property, we want to control the means of exploitation. Well, you can't condemn property and then want to nationalize stuff, because that's just the people in the government treating industries and factories and means of production they did not create as stuff to be looted. So the thief is evil if the thief steals some guy's wallet and then someone else grabs the wallet from the thief and the thief is outraged. Well, he's evil because he is denying property rights by stealing someone's wallet, and then he's affirming property rights by being outraged that someone is stealing from him. So if you have people in your life who use ethics, this happens on the left all the time. All the time. You see this with the CNN fiasco recently, where it's like, well, if you have the realistic depiction of somebody who looks like Donald Trump being ritualistically slaughtered in a pool of blood by minorities every night that Shakespeare in the Park is running, well, that's just art, man. That's just artistic expression. That's free expression, man. What are you, some kind of square who doesn't like people that express themselves? Or Kathy Griffin holding up the severed head, the usual stuff. But then when there's a goofy meme created of Trump fake tackling a logo, suddenly this is incitement to violence because logo lives matter. So this is the hypocrisy of the left. They know exactly what incitement to violence is, which is one of the reasons why they, I think, tend to do it quite a lot. So they're responsible because they get all hysterical when it comes to even minor violations of ethics that they inflict upon others. And it is that's how we know, I think, the hideous evil of this sort of stuff. So that's my sort of brief introduction to how you can identify evil and what it means, and why evil people are responsible rather than just ignorance. But you had a point that you wanted to make earlier?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent summary, and it really hits the point on what evil is in better words than I can put. The part that I wanted to focus on particularly, and I think it's important to add in, I grew up with a fairly Christian upbringing, which gets into the nature of forgiveness, which is where this comes from. But particularly, there's this tendency to always assume that they had a hard upbringing and blah blah blah, and it was a hard childhood or hard life circumstances that led them to, one step to the next, to the actions that would definitely be considered evil. They didn't just start out this way.
Well, that's because the soul is created by God, but is corrupted by the devil. And it cannot be corrupted, I guess in certain traditions, in Catholic tradition, I don't know if there still is, because the doctrine seems to be in flux these days. No hell anymore, other than CNN, but there is mortal sins, right, where you commit a murder or something else where you cannot, no matter what, you cannot gain entrance into heaven. But there are a lot of Christian sects or Christian belief systems wherein the potential moral perfectibility or recovery of your soul is always available. Like, you can do horrible things, but if you repent and you make amends, particularly on your deathbed and so on, then you have a chance of getting into heaven. And that's because, of course, in the Christian worldview, as is the case with most religious worldviews, you have a soul that is not of this world, not of this plane, and it is immortal and it is perfect. And you are tempted, of course, by the devil, by the flesh, by the material temptations around you, but you have this soul, and therefore the possibility of redemption and forgiveness always exists. This does not appear to coincide with the physiology of evil, the fact that empathy is like 13 different complex mental systems that all have to develop in sequence, and if you miss the window for developing empathy, there doesn't seem to be any way or consistent way that people have of being able to regenerate empathy in you later on. It's like the language window. If you don't learn language by the age of sort of 9 or 10, you're always going to have trouble with it. So nobody knows, I think, how to reform like sociopaths and just like straight on evil people and pedophiles and so on. Nobody knows how to reform that group, and a huge amounts of energy and effort have been poured into trying to figure that out. So the physiology of the brain appears to harden over time. And if you don't have empathy, I don't think, people can correct me when this goes out as the show, but my understanding and what I've read most recently is that nobody knows how to fix empathy later on. So the idea that you have a soul that is perfectible and the right combination of words can unlock the divine perfection of virtue within you, no matter what you've done in your life, does not appear to coincide or match the physiology of evil, that, what starts off as cobwebs ends up as chains. And there does seem to become a point wherein recovery of the personality, recovery of humanity, recovery of empathy, and so on appears to be, to all intents and purposes, practically impossible. And I think that's one of the reasons, like me knowing about that, although I was raised as a Christian and accept and understand and respect some of the Christian values, in this particular instance, the idea that you can mirror Jesus's or God's capacity to forgive, and through that process, you can engender or grow virtue in another human being, that the conscience and the soul is always available to us, that virtue is always available to us. You just need to figure out the right combination of words and gestures and whatever it is you're going to do to unlock it. It doesn't seem to fit. Like if a smoker corrupts his lungs completely, they're all cancerous and all messed up, there's no magical pair of ghostly perfect backup lungs that you can, in case of emergency, get the backup ghost lungs. And it's the same thing with the conscience. If you haven't developed it, if through either your choices or your environment, or probably both, you just don't have a conscience, there is no ghost conscience backup that anyone knows how to activate, contra to what Christianity often teaches. Does that make sense in terms of that?
Yeah. And I guess that runs into where I'm struggling with on a personal level, is because there's a part of me that knows, I can look at a historical figure like a Hitler or a Stalin, and they're evil, but there's this part of me from, not just Christianity, but the way we were, like childhood in general, that you put an actual face to it. I can look at a Barack Obama, for example, who can do drone strikes on a massive number of children in foreign countries, and generally think, well, he's probably a good guy and misguided. And I know that's not true. To an extent that you can do drone strikes on children, you just can't be a good person, in my opinion. So I'm in this weird conflict of, a part of me with the way I was raised and conflict the way I'm thinking now. So I guess that's part of what I'm struggling with. And if that's the case, what does it take to expose someone who is evil, in a sense? If someone could do something so dramatic as Hillary Clinton with the Clinton Foundation or whatever, and I can still sit there, and because I see an actual face of a human being, and I can still think after all that, oh, maybe they're misguided. Why does it take such an extreme amount for me to see anything else? It's a weird program. I think it's a programming from childhood or something to get over. But
did you used to be on the left of the political spectrum at any point in your life?
No. I grew up in a fairly somewhat, I guess, conservative, but almost somewhat libertarian family. Minimal spanking and everything. So it's, that's why I'm thinking maybe somewhere in the Christian upbringing, but it's hard for me to point to.
Well, look, the desire to rescue existing power structures is very deeply embedded in our minds, because if we can tweak existing power structures, existing ways of organizing society, then we don't have to have any fundamental changes, because fundamental changes are extremely risky in societies as a whole, which is why, the kick the can down the road, the extend and pretend, the borrow and borrow and borrow is what continues in society, because fundamental changes are incredibly resisted, incredibly volatile, usually result in staggering levels of internecine violence and so on. So the idea is like, well, maybe we have a terrible system. Maybe we have a terrible system that not only attracts bad people, but makes people bad as well, as a whole. Now, if that's the case, then trying to reform the system by having better people run it is, in the long run, going to be not working, right? And so we have this great thirst for the idea that we can reform bad people, because if we can't reform bad people, then we have to reform bad systems. And if we have to reform bad systems and we can't reform bad people, then we can't reform the bad systems by putting good people in there in the long run. And therefore, we have to start looking at changing systems, which is a highly volatile thing to do, and something which, it's like the guy who fell down the cliff and got his arm trapped between two rocks. And he's like, well, the only way I can survive is by taking that penknife and hacking off my own arm. And it's like, that's not first on your list. He's like, hey, before I figure out if I'm stuck, maybe I should just hack my arm off. It's like, that's the very last resort. And we do have a great hunger for trying to figure out if we can make bad people good, or if we can make bad systems good, because the alternative, which is to change the system, is risky and difficult and provokes an enormous amount of conflict. I mean, if you look at Donald Trump, the system that he's trying to reform, the Overton window of what is allowed to be reformed in the American political system is very small. I mean, he's supposed to have complete control over immigration, but he can barely get anything passed in the realm of immigration. Nobody's talking about the true libertarian goals of, say, like no welfare state, no social security, no pensions, no Medicare, no Medicaid, like even just to extract Obamacare from the existing medical tangled government-controlled setup is proving to be what seems to be a nigh impossible task. So it is a great deal it's a great deal of challenge, great deal of difficulty to change systems. I mean, there's a great case to be made for immigration into the first world, saying, look, in the next 40 years, a significant proportion of jobs are going to be automated. And of course, like in factories, it's been going on for a long time, but we're talking knowledge workers as well. I mean, I don't think it's far off, and I think in some places it's already been achieved. Of course, like facial recognition computers are better. Chess computers are now better. Medical diagnosis and proposals for treatment have been growing in leaps and bounds. Robot surgeons, it's not just truckers and guys who drive forklifts and so on. There is going to be a massive revolution in automation over the next generation and a half. So bringing in massive amounts of fairly uneducated third world people at a time when jobs are being automated like nobody's business. People will say, well, Japan's got declining birth rate, and I saw these photos in the today of here's my selfie with my sex robot. Oh, I should probably not be saying that. Here, Japanese guy says, here's my selfie with my sex robot. They say, oh, well, the Japanese is like, well, but all of this automation, maybe they can provide for all of their, this is a country which has more adult diapers being sold than child diapers, but who knows how this is going to shake out. And so, this is one of the arguments, like, stop immigration, because we don't know there's never been a revolution like this before in history, this level of automation. And the thing is, too, there was in agriculture, at the turn of the last century, like 75% of Americans were involved in agriculture. Now it's like 2% and declining. But when people left the farm, they had the cities and the factories to go to. Now, when things are automated, at the moment, the demand for low IQ people, the demand for repetitive skill people, the demand for any skill that can be reliably reproduced by self-learning, by neural nets and so on, is going to decline. And at the same time, bringing in all of these people, I mean, it's complete madness. In my view, immigration should be completely rethought until this process shakes out, because who knows where it's going to land.
So you're saying it's almost, because it's easier in a sense to hope that the person can change than to take any steps. It's sort of almost like the easy way out, or?
Well, I wouldn't say it's necessarily the easy way out. It's easier. And if you can get better people into a system, then that's what you should do. Like, so for instance, let's say you've got some company, just ABC company, and the doddering old founder, who was very good at the business, handed over the business to his daughter, and his daughter's terrible at it, right? Well, in that situation, you have a good business with a bad manager, bad CEO. So then you replace the CEO, and the business recovers. You don't just sit there and say, well, let's shut the whole thing down because we've got a bad leader, bad manager, right? You could have a sports team that is foundering because of a bad coach. You don't just disband the whole sports team, you get a better coach. So there are times where the system is reasonable, but the leadership is terrible, or the employees are terrible, or whatever it's going to be. The business idea is good, but the people who execute it are bad. And therefore, you don't shut down the whole thing. You just replace the leadership. Now, there are other times, I think, like communism. It doesn't matter who's in charge of communism. It's never going to work. Never going to work. It's a pretty funny meme floating around, things that children need to hear. You're special. I love you. You can do it. You can be anything that you want to be. And communism has failed every single time it's been tried. Things that children need to hear. So communism, you can't make it. You can't make it work. Kidnapping people to make them love you. That's not, we get a better kidnapper or kidnap the right people and so on. And so the difference between a decent system that needs better leaders versus a system that is so bad that leadership, well, first of all, a normal, sane human being would not want to be attracted to would not want to be in charge of a communist system because they wouldn't have the vanity but if they did, right, there's an interesting study that is worth mentioning. You can do a search for the title. It's called Power Robs the Brain of Empathy. And researchers have found even the smallest bit of power, like more money, a job promotion, shuts down our ability to empathize with others, right? So these mirror neurons, like if you see this thing, these funny videos, some guy gets hit with a nut shot and you're like, oh, you kind of feel it. That's a mirror neuron that's firing. And the mirror neurons are diminished when people have more power or feel more powerful. So power seems to grow by eating empathy, by eating mirror neurons, which is one of the reasons why if you have a shred of empathy when you go into a system of high power, it is likely that the power is going to diminish it. So this is something to watch out for and something to be aware of. So if power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, then all systems based on political power, on coercion, on a monopoly of the initiation of force, will fail in the long run. And this is true, Trump or no Trump. Trump, for me, is to buy time to continue to have a conversation about voluntarism within society. He's a way of fighting demographics that will make that conversation impossible. But he won't turn the United States government into a voluntarist paradise. This is just buying time and getting the media out of the way so we can have conversations without escalating hysteria from the media. So, yeah, it's very tempting to say, is this just a bad company? We need a better manager, or is it communism and it's got to be done away with completely?
Right. That's interesting. It makes me wonder too how much. Just as you're going on, I kind of thought about the tangent that I feel as though I personally have gone through a lot of change in my own life in terms of improving. I wasn't always considered myself, I was somewhat selfish and stuff as younger, and I've changed myself a bit, at least I think, and I hope so. So I wonder how much of that is just projecting onto other people. If I could do it, maybe they can too, but you've brought up the point that not everyone has the same capacity for empathy if it never developed at some point.
Just do it all.
Differences.
No, just do it all. Just do it all.
What do you mean?
Think of a conversion to Christianity. From what I've heard, it tends to happen as a crash, boom, bang. You don't sort of buy a house 5 miles from the church, then 4 miles from the church, then 3 miles, then put a toe inside. Then it's like, boom, I'm there, right? I'm there. And for me, with philosophy, if I could rewind and do some stuff over again, I would have just gone all the way early on. Now, I went as far as I was able to go, not emotionally, but intellectually. I generally went as far as I could go, but I did not. I went deep. I didn't go horizontal. So if I could go back and give myself advice to my younger self, which is part of what some of these conversations with y'all young men and women are about, it is to say, just go all the way. Just like, this is a Band-Aid. Don't do it hair by hair. This is agony, right? Don't do it little bit by little bit. Non-aggression principles, self-knowledge, honesty, virtue, courage. Just do it all. This gradualism in theory is perpetuity in practice. And so if you're going to accept values, just accept them and do it all. Just do it all. It will be a relief. There's not this 1 foot on the pier, 1 foot on the boat, drifting apart kind of nonsense. You go all the way. You commit. You make it 150%. You do it deep in yourself. You do it deep into truth. You do it horizontally across your relationships. And you get your shit organized as quick as humanly possible so that you can enjoy the fruits of your labors, because we all have a lot of mental baggage to jettison, Tom, right? I mean, it's like we're all starting this thing 400 pounds heavy. Now, if you're 400 pounds heavy, you say, well, I'm 30. I think my goal is I'm going to lose a pound a year, right? No, you lose the weight as fast as safely possible. I mean, if that includes chainsawing off your belly, if that were safe, you'd include that too. You want to try and get to where you're going to be as quickly as humanly possible so you can really build things from there. You know, like if you want to move from one place to another, you don't just take, okay, here's the toothpaste cap, and now next month I'm going to take one slipper. And it's like, no, just move. Go there, be there, build your new house there, and grow from there. So I think a lot of what you're doing, and I could be wrong, but a lot of what you're doing is like, can I do it incrementally? Can I do it without upsetting too much? Can I do it without too much risk for myself, for society, for friends, for family, for relationships? Can I do it a little bit at a time? And you want to do that because you don't want to do it as yet. Once you want to do it, you do it. When I was in theater school, there was an acting teacher. He was okay, not great, but I do remember one thing he said. So as actors, like their big thing, can you cry? It was a big thing. If crying were acting, my mom would get an Oscar every year. But and so people would be like trying to make themselves cry. And so he said, stop that. Don't do that. Don't do that. And we didn't understand. It's like, but he said, okay, let me explain this to you. So he had me sit in a chair and he said, okay, Steph, try to get out of the chair. And I'm like, it takes a little, try to get out of the chair, and you're straining and you're wiggling your butt, and try to get out of the chair, right? And he's like, is that fun to watch? And people are like, no. It looks kind of tense and stressful, actually. And he says, okay, Steph, get out of the chair. And I just stood up, right? And that has always stuck with me in terms of getting things done. And that's been a very motivating image for me, Just get out of the chair. Stop being a chair-sitting guy and get up out of the chair and walk and get where you want to go. Don't do this incrementalism stuff. It's torture to everyone involved.
Yeah, I can see where it leads to that. It gives me a lot to think about. That's not something to reply immediately to.
All right. Well, listen, I got a huge mass of callers tonight. I really appreciate the call. I'm glad it was helpful.
Yeah, I appreciate the time, Steph.
You're very welcome, man. Take care.